In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez, Part 2, Chapter 6, Minerva, 1949. What do you want, Minerva Mirabal? Summer. I knew the rumor that got started once I'd been living at home a few years, that I didn't like men. It's true that I never paid much attention to the ones around here, but it wasn't that I didn't like them. I just didn't know I was looking at what I wanted. For one thing, my nose was always in a book. Love was something that I had read would come. The man I'd love would look like the poet in the frontispiece, pale and sad, with a pen in his hand. For another thing, Papa discouraged boyfriends. I was his treasure, he'd say, patting his lap as if I were a girl in a jumper instead of a woman of 23 in the slacks he objected to my wearing in public. Papa, I'd say, I'm too old for that. One time he offered me anything if I would sit on his lap. Just come here and whisper it in my ear. His voice was a little thick from drinking. I sat right down and swooped to my prize. I want to go to the university, Papa, please. Now, he said, as if I were all worked up about something. You wouldn't want to leave your old Papa, would you? But Papa, you've got Mama, I argued. His face went blank. We both listened for Mama stirring in the front of the house near where he sat. Maria Teresa was off at school. Dede was newly married, Patria 2 times a mother, and here I was, a grown woman, sitting on my father's lap. Your mother and I, he began, but thought better of continuing. Then he added, we need you around. 3 years cooped up at home since I'd graduated from Immaculada, and I was ready to scream with boredom. The worst part was getting newsy letters from Elsa and Sunita in the capital. They were taking a theory of errors class that would make Sor Asuncion's hair stand on end even under her wimple. They had seen Tintin in Tender Little Pumpkins and been in the country club to hear Alberti and his band. And there were so many nice-looking men in the capital. I'd get restless with jealousy when Papa brought their letters back from the Salcedo post office. I'd jump in the Jeep and roar off into the countryside, my foot pressing heavily down on the gas, as if speed could set me free. I'd drive further and further out, pretending to myself that I was running away to the capital. But something always made me turn the car around and head back home, something I had seen from the corner of my eye. One afternoon, I was on one of these getaway rampages, racing down the small side roads that spiderweb our property. Near the northeast cacao groves, I saw the Ford parked in front of a small yellow house. I tried to figure out what campesino family lived there, but I couldn't say I had ever met them. So I made it my business to take that back road frequently, keeping an eye out. Every time I drove the Ford, these raggedy girls came running after me, holding out their hands, calling for mints. I studied them. There were 3 that ran to the road whenever they heard the car. A 4th one sometimes came in the arms of the oldest. 4 girls I checked, 3 in panties and the baby naked. One time I stopped at the side of the road and stared at their Mirabal eyes. Who is your father? I asked point blank. They had been bold, clamoring kids a moment before. Now, spoken to by a lady in a car, they hung their heads and looked at me from the corners of their eyes. Do you have a brother? I asked more gently. It was a delicious revenge to hear them murmur, No, Signora. Papa was not going to get the son he wanted after all. A little later the woman came sauntering from her house, her hair just combed out from rollers and too much of something on her face. When she saw me, her face fell. She scolded the kids as if that was what she'd come for. I told you not to bother the cars. They're not bothering anything, I defended them, caressing the baby's cheek. The woman was looking me over. I suppose she was taking inventory, what I had, what she didn't have, and doing the simple arithmetic, and perhaps a few days later exacting some new promise from Papa. Everywhere I looked, I kept seeing those 4 raggedy girls, with Papa's and my own deep-set eyes staring back at me. Give me, they cried. But when I asked them, what do you want? They stood mute, their mouths hanging open, not knowing where to start. Had they asked me the same thing, I would have stared back, mute too. What did I want? I didn't know any more. 3 years stuck in Ojo de Agua, and I was like the princess put to sleep in a fairy tale. I read and complained and argued with Dede, but all that time I was snoring away. When I met Leo, it was as if I woke up. The givens, all I'd been taught, fell away, like so many covers when you sit up in bed. Now, when I asked myself, "What do you want, Minerva Mirabal?" I was shocked to find I didn't have an answer. All I knew was I was not falling in love, no matter how deserving I thought Leo was. So what? I'd argue with myself. What's more important, romance or revolution? But a little voice kept saying, both, both. I want both. Back and forth in my mind went, weaving a yes by night and unraveling it by day and to a no. As it always happens, your life decides for you anyway. Leo announced he was seeking asylum out of the country. I was relieved that circumstances would be resolving things between us. Still, when he left, I was hurt that he didn't even say goodbye. Then I started worrying that his silence meant he had been caught. Out of the corners of my eyes, I kept seeing Leo himself. He was not a pretty sight. His body was bruised and broken, as if he endured all tortures in La Fortaleza had ever been described to me. I was sure I was having premonitions that Leo had not escaped after all. Mama, of course, noticed the tightening in my face. My bad headaches and asthma attacks worried her. "You need rest," she prescribed one afternoon and sent me to bed in Papa's room, the coolest in the house. He was off in the Ford for his afternoon review of the farm. I lay in that mahogany bed, tossing this way and that, unable to sleep. Then something I hadn't planned. I got up and tried the door of the armoire. It was locked, which wasn't all that strange, as the hardware was always getting stuck. Using one of my bobby pins, I popped the inside spring and the door sprang open. I ran my hand along Papa's clothes, releasing his smell in the room. I stared at his new fancy goyaberas and started going through the pockets. In the inside pocket of his dress jacket, I found a packet of papers and pulled them out. Prescriptions for his medicines, a bill for a Panama hat he'd been wearing around the farm, a new important look for him, a bill from El Gallo for 7 yards of gingham, a girl's fabric, an invitation from the National Palace to some party. Then 4 letters addressed to me from Leo. I read them through hungrily. He hadn't heard from me about his proposal to leave the country. What proposal? He had arranged for me to come to the Colombian embassy. I should let him know through his cousin Mario. He was waiting for my answer. Next letter. Still no answer, he complained in a 3rd letter. In the final letter, he wrote that he was leaving that afternoon on the diplomatic pouch plane. He understood it was too big a step for me at the moment. Someday in the future, maybe. He could only hope. It seemed suddenly that I'd missed a great opportunity. My life would have been nobler if I had followed Leo. But how could I have made the choice when I didn't even know about it? I forgot my earlier ambivalence, and I blamed Papa for everything. His young woman, his hurting Mama, his cooping me up while he went gallivanting around. My hands were shaking so bad that it was hard to fold the letters into their envelopes. I stuffed them in my pocket, but his bills and correspondence I put back. I left the doors of the armoire gaping open. I wanted him to know he'd been found out. Minutes later, I was roaring away in the jeep without a word to Mama. What would I have said? I'm going to find my good-for-nothing father and drag him back? I knew where to find him all right. Now that Papa was doing so well, he had bought a second car, a jeep. I knew damn well he wasn't reviewing the fields if he had taken the Ford, not the jeep. I headed straight for that yellow house. When I got there, those 4 girls looked up, startled. After all, the man they had always expected was already there, the car parked in back where it couldn't be seen from the road. I turned into the dirt path and crashed into the Ford, making the bumper curl up and shattering the window in back. Then I came down on that horn until he appeared, shirtless and furious, in the doorway. He took one look at me and got as pale as an olive-skinned man can get. For a long moment he didn't say anything. "What do you want?" he said at last. I heard the little girls crying and realized my own face was wet with tears. When he came forward, I gave a warning honk and wildly backed out of the path and onto the road. A pickup coming around the curve veered and ran into the ditch. Plantains, oranges, mangoes, yucca, spilling all over the road. That didn't stop me. No, I stepped on the gas. From the corner of my eye, I saw him, a figure growing smaller and smaller until I left him behind me. When I got home, Mama met me at the door. She eyed me, and she must have known. Next time, you don't leave this house without saying where you're going. We both knew her scold was meaningless. She hadn't even asked where I'd been. Papa returned that night, his face drawn with anger. He ate his supper in silence, as if his review of the farm had not gone well. As soon as I could without making Mama more suspicious, I excused myself. I had a throbbing headache, I explained, heading for my room. In a little while I heard his knock. I want to see you outside. His voice through the door was commanding. I threw water on my face, combed my hands through my hair, and went out to Papa. He led me down the drive past the dented Ford into the dark garden. The moon was a thin, bright machete cutting its way through the patches of clouds. By its sharp light I could see my father stop and turn to face me. With his shrinking and my height, we were now eye to eye. There was no warning it was coming. His hand slammed into the side of my face as if it had never been before on any part of my body. I staggered back, stunned, more with the idea of his having hit me than with the pain exploding in my head. That's to remind you that you owe your father some respect. I don't owe you a thing, I said. My voice was as sure and commanding as his. You've lost my respect. I saw his shoulders droop. I heard him sigh. Right then and there, it hit me harder than his slap. I was much stronger than Papa. Mama was much stronger. He was the weakest one of all. It was he who would have the hardest time with the shabby choices he'd made. He needed our love. I hid them to protect you, he said. At first, I didn't know what he was talking about. Then I realized he must have discovered the letters missing from his coat pocket. I know of at least 3 of Virgilio's friends who have disappeared. So he was going to pass this off as my fury over his taking my mail. And I knew that in order to go on living under the same roof, I would have to pretend this was our true difference. The fancy invitation I found in Papa's pocket caused another uproar. This time it was from Mama. It was an invitation to a private party being thrown by Trujillo himself in one of his secluded mansions 3 hours away. A handwritten note at the end requested that La Señorita Minerva Mirabal not fail to show. Now that Papa had become rich, he got invited to a lot of official parties and functions. I always went along as Papa's partner since Mama wouldn't go. Who wants to see an old woman, she complained. Come on, Mama, I argued. You're in your prime. A mujerina of 51. I snapped my fingers, jazzing up Mama's life. But the truth was, Mama looked old, even older than Papa, with his dapper new hat and his linen guayaberos and his high black boots and a debonair cane that seemed like a more important prop than a walking aid. Her hair had gone steel gray, and she pulled it back in a severe bun that showed off the long-suffering look on her face. This time, though, Mama didn't want me to go either. The note at the end scared her. This wasn't an official do, but something personal. In fact, after the last big party, a colonel friend had visited Jaimito's family asking after the tall, attractive woman Don Enrique Mirabal had brought along. She had caught El Jefe's eye. Mama wanted to get me a medical excuse from Dr. Lavendier. After all, migraines and asthma attacks were against the law, weren't they? Trujillo is the law, Papa whispered, as we all did nowadays when we pronounced that dreaded name. Finally, Mama relented, but she insisted Pedrito and Patria go along to take care of me, and Jaimito and Dede go to make sure Patria and Pedrito did their job. Maria Teresa begged to go too, but Mama wouldn't hear of it. Expose another young, single daughter to danger? No, señorita. Besides, Maria Teresa couldn't go to night parties until her quinceañera next year. Poor Mate cried and cried. As a consolation prize, I offered to bring her back another souvenir. Last time at the party at Hotel Montana, we all got paper fans with the Virgencita on one side and El Jefe on the other. I kept making Maria Teresa turn the fan around when she sat in front of me, fanning herself. Sometimes it was El Jefe's probing eyes, sometimes it was the Virgin's pretty face I couldn't stand to look at. With the party a week away, Papa had to get the Ford fixed. The president of our local branch of Trujillo Tillers couldn't very well arrive at El Jefe's house in a Jeep. It seemed pretty appropriate to me, but having banged up Papa's beauty, it wasn't for me to disagree. While the Ford was at the shop, I drove Papa to his doctor's appointments in San Francisco. It was sad how the richer he got, the more his health deteriorated. He was drinking too much, even I could see that. His heart was weak, and his gout made it painful sometimes for him to move around. Dr. Lavandier had him on treatments twice a week. I'd drop him off, then visit with Dede and Jaimito at their new ice cream shop until it was time to pick him up. One morning, Papa told me to go on home. He had some errands to run after his appointment. Jaimito would drive him back later. "We can run them together," I offered. When he looked away, I guessed that he was up to. Several days ago, I had driven out to the yellow house and found it all boarded up. Of course, Papa hadn't broken with his woman, but merely moved her off the grounds and into a new town. I sat facing forward, not saying a word. Finally, he admitted it. "You have to believe me. I only go to see my children. I'm not involved with their mother anymore." I waited for things to settle down inside me. Then I said, "I want to meet them. They're my sisters, after all." I could see he was moved by my acknowledging them. He reached over, but I was not ready yet for his hugs. "I'll be back to pick you up." We drove down narrow streets past row on row of respectable little houses. Finally, we came to a stop in front of a pretty turquoise house with a porch and trim painted white. There they were, awaiting Papa, 4 little girls in look-alike pale yellow gingham dresses. The 2 oldest must have recognized me, for their faces grew solemn when I got out of the car. The minute Papa was on the sidewalk, they darted towards him and dug the mints out of his pockets. I felt a pang of jealousy seeing them treat Papa in the same way my sisters and I had. "This is my big girl, Minerva," he introduced me. Then, putting a hand on each one's head, he presented them to me. The oldest, Margarita, was about 10, then 3 more with about 3 years difference between them, down to the baby with her pacifier on a dirty ribbon around her neck. While Papa went inside the house with an envelope, I waited on the porch, asking them questions they were too shy to answer. As we were leaving, I saw the mother peeking at me from behind the door. I beckoned for her to come out. "Minerva Mirabal," I said, offering her my hand. The woman hung her head and mumbled her name, Carmen something. I noticed she was wearing a cheap ring, the adjustable kind that children buy at the street corner from candy vendors. I wondered if she was trying to pass herself off as a respectable married lady in this, one of the nicer barrios in San Francisco. As we drove back to Ojo de Agua, I was working out what had been happening 10 years back that might have driven Papa into the arms of another woman. Patria, Dede, and I had just gone away to Immaculada Concepcion, and Maria Teresa would have been all of 4 years old. Maybe, I told myself, Papa had missed us so much that he had gone in search of a young girl to replace us. I looked over at him, and instantly he looked my way. "That was very fine of you," he said, smiling hesitantly. "I know the clouds have already rained," I said, "but Papa, why did you do it?" His hands gripped his cane until his knuckles whitened. "Cosas de los hombres," he said. "Things a man does." So that was supposed to excuse him, macho that he was. Before I could ask him another question, Papa spoke up. "Why did you do what you just did?" Quick as my reputation said my mouth was, I couldn't come up with an answer until I remembered his own words. "Things a woman does." As I said those words, my woman's eyes sprang open. All the way home, I kept seeing them from the corners of my eyes. Men bending in the fields, men riding horses, men sitting side by side on the road, their chairs tipped back, nibbling on a spear of grass, and I knew very well I was looking at what I wanted at last. Discovery Day Dance, October 12. By the time we find the party, we're an hour late. All the way here, Papa and Pedrito and Jaimito have been working out the details of their story. You say how we started out early this morning to give us plenty of time, and then you say we didn't know the way. Papa assigns the different facts to his sons-in-law. And you, he looks around at me in the back seat, you keep quiet. You don't have a plan. You don't have to plan anything when you're telling the truth, I reminded them. But no one listens to me. Why should they? They're probably thinking I got them into this. Here is the truth. We arrived in San Cristobal late this afternoon and got a room at the local hotel and changed. By then our dresses were a mess from riding around on our laps all day. The worse you look, the better for you, Patria said when I complained that I looked like I'd gotten here on a donkey. Then we climbed back in the car and drove forever. As a man who always knows where he's going, Jaimito could very well stop to ask for directions. Couldn't very well stop to ask for directions. Soon we were lost on the back road somewhere near Bani. At a checkpoint, a guardia finally convinced Jaimito that we were going the wrong way. We headed back an hour late. Jaimito parks the Ford at the end of a long driveway facing the road. In case we have to take off quickly, he says in a low voice. He's been a bundle of nerves about this whole outing. I guess we all have. It's a hike to the house. Every few steps we have to stop at a checkpoint and flash our invitation. The driveway is well lit, so at least we can see the puddles before we splash into them. It's been raining on and off all day, the usual October hurricane weather. This year, though, the rain seemed more severe than ever. Everyone says so. My theory is that the god of thunder, Huracan, always acts up around the holiday of the conquistador who killed off all of his Taino devotees. When I suggest this to Patria as we walk up the drive, she gives me her pained Madonna look. Ay, Minerva, por Dios, keep the tongue in cheek tonight. Manuel de Moya is pacing back and forth at the entrance. I recognize him from the last party, and of course his picture is always in the papers. Secretary of State, people say, winking one eye. Everyone knows his real job is rounding up pretty girls for El Jefe to try out. How they get talked into it, I don't know. Manuel de Moya is supposed to be so smooth with the ladies, they probably think they're following the example of the Virgencita if they bed down with the benefactor of the fatherland. Papa starts in on our explanation, but Don Manuel cuts him off. This is not like him. The Spanish ambassador has been waiting. He checks his watch, holding it to his ear as if it might whisper El Jefe's whereabouts. You don't see any cars on the way? Papa shakes his head, his face full of exaggerated concern. Don Manuel snaps his fingers and several officers rush forward for instructions. They are to keep a sharp lookout while he escorts the Mirabals to their table. We wonder at this special attention, and Papa begs Don Manuel not to go to so much bother. This, he says, offering me his arm, is all my pleasure. We go down a long corridor and into a courtyard hung with lanterns. The crowd hushes as we enter. The band leader stands up but then sits back down when he realizes it's not El Jefe. Luis Alberti moved his whole orchestra from the capital just to be on call at Casa de Caoba. This is supposed to be El Jefe's favorite party mansion, where he keeps his favorite of the moment. At the last few parties, the excited gossip in the powder rooms has been that at present the house is vacant. Only one reserved table is left in front of the dais. Don Manuel is pulling out chairs for everybody, but when I go to sit down next to Patria, he says, No, El Jefe has invited you to his table. He indicates the head table on the dais, where a few dignitaries and their wives nod in my direction. Patria and Dede exchange a scared look. It is really quite an honor, he adds when he notes my hesitation. Across the table, Papa is still standing. Go on, my daughter. You are keeping Don Manuel waiting. I give Papa an angry look. Has he lost all his principles? From my vantage point at the raised table, I look around. In keeping with Discovery Day, the whole courtyard has been outfitted like one of Columbus's ships. On each table there is a clever centerpiece, a little caravel with tissue sails and lighted candles for mass, a perfect souvenir for mate. I size it up but decide it won't fit in my purse. Dede catches my eye, smiling only after a lag of a second, and we have to seem pleased. She touches her glass and gives me the slightest nod. Don't drink anything you are offered, the gesture reminds me. We've heard the stories. Young women drugged, then raped by El Jefe. But what could Dede be thinking? That Trujillo is going to drug me right here in front of a crowd? Then what? Manuel de Moya will drag me off to a waiting black Cadillac. Or there'll be 2 waiting black Cadillacs, one with a leering look-alike. That's another story. Security has introduced a double as a protective measure to confuse any would-be assassins. I roll my eyes at Dede, and then she glares at me. I lift my glass in a reckless toast. As if it were a signal, everyone rises to their feet, lifting their glasses. There's a stir at the entrance, newspapermen swarming, flashbulbs popping. A crowd presses around him, and so I don't see him until he's almost at our table. He looks younger than I remember him from our performance 5 years ago, the hair darkened, the figure trim. It must be all that picapalo we hear he's been drinking, a special brew his brujo cooks up to keep him sexually potent. After the toast, the Spanish ambassador presents this illustrious descendant of the great conquistador with yet another medal. There is the same question about where to pin it on the cluttered sash that crosses his chest. Chapita, the underground boys call him. Leo has told me that the nickname comes from El Jefe's childhood habit of stringing bottle caps across his chest to look like medals. At long last, we settle down to our plates of cold sancocho. Surprisingly, El Jefe does not sit next to me. I feel more and more puzzled as to my role this evening at this table. To my left, Manuel de Moya commences reminiscing about his New York modeling days. The story is Trujillo met him on one of those shopping trips he periodically makes to the States to order his elevator shoes, his skin whiteners and creams, his satin sashes, and rare bird plumes for his bicorn Napoleonic hats. He hired the model right on the spot, a tall, polished, English-speaking white Dominican, to decorate his staff. My right-hand partner, an aging senator from San Cristobal, compliments the stew and points to an attractive blonde woman seated to Trujillo's left. My wife, he boasts, half Cuban. Not knowing what to say, I nod and lean over to pick up the napkin I dropped when I stood up for El Jefe's entrance. Under the tablecloth, a hand is exploring the inner folds of a woman's thigh. I work it out and realize it is Trujillo's hand fondling the senator's wife. The tables are pushed back and the music starts, though I wonder that they don't just move the party indoors. There's a strong breeze announcing rain. Every once in a while, a gust topples a glass or a caravel, and there's a loud crash. The soldiers patrolling the edges of the party reach for their guns. The floor remains empty as it must until El Jefe has danced the first dance. He rises from his chair, and I am so sure he's going to ask me that I feel a twinge of disappointment when he turns instead to the wife of the Spanish ambassador. Leo's words of warning wash over me. This regime is seductive. How else would a whole nation fall prey to this little man? God help him. Where is he right now? Was he granted asylum by the embassy, or was he caught and locked up in La Fortaleza, as my premonitions kept telling me? My head throbs as my imagination dashes here and there, trying to find him safe haven. Could I have the honor? Manuel de Moya is standing at my side. I shake my head. Ay, Don Manuel, what a headache I have. I feel a little glee at being able to legitimately refuse him. A cloud of annoyance crosses his face, but in a flash he is all good manners. We must get you a calmante then. No, I wave him off. It will pass if I sit here quietly. I stress quietly. I do not want to make conversation with Don Manuel about my headache. When he goes off, I look over at our table. Patria lifts her eyebrows as if asking, "How are you holding up?" I touch my forehead and close my eyes a moment. She knows how I am suffering from headaches these days. Tension, Mama says, and sends me away from the store for extra naps. Patria comes up to the platform with a whole packet of calmantes. Always the mother, that one. She's got a handkerchief in that purse Should someone sneeze, a mint to keep a child happy, a rosary in case anyone wants to pray. I start to tell her about the hanky-panky I saw under the table, but the pervasive Manuel de Moya is beside us again. He has brought a waiter with a glass of water and 2 aspirin on a little silver tray. I open my hand and disclose my own pills. Don Manuel's face falls. But I do need more water, I say, to show some gratitude. He presents the glass with so much ceremony my gratitude dissolves like pills in my stomach. Later at the table I listen to him make idle conversation with the old senator about the various ailments they have both suffered. Every once in a while he checks to see if my headache is any better. Finally, after the 3rd time, I answer him with what I know he wants. Let's try the country cure, I say, and I verify that he is not a man to trust when he asks, "What cure is that?"